Okay, let's change the conversation here on Arise Exchange. Let's talk about budget, which has raised concerns about Nigeria's proposed 2022 budget. Queries the missing 198.7 billion oil company payments to NDDC in the 16.39 trillion naira spending plan. BudgIT is Budget Foundation is a civic tech organization that leads the advocacy for transparency and accountability in public office and other African countries. Let's talk to the head of research and development advocacy here, policy advocacy at the organization. Abel Akeni is live here in the studio. Thank you very much for coming through.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bosin.
Great. Give me a bit of a broad overview of the year 2021 appropriations by budget. What do you make of it?
First and foremost, I think we must say that the 2022 appropriations, the efforts by the government to release the document quite early is very commendable. It's a big win for budget transparency because it gives adequate time for a lot of public analysts and the National Assembly to actually scrutinize it and make appropriate amendments. So another comment we would have on the budget is that it's coming at a time where the Mr. President's tenure will be coming to an end. It's like the first full year budget before the end of his 8-year tenure. And this is important because that's also an election campaign year. And one of the things we've observed throughout this administration is that there has been some sort of increase in transparency, but a reduction in accountability. In 2016, the first year, his first full year budget, we saw that was one of the years that MDAs, about 324 MDAs, refused to submit the audited statements for that particular year. That was the highest in 22 years that any MD or most MDAs were not submitting an account for how they spent budgeted funds. So this is very important. Outside those two basics, I think a lot of the fiscal fundamentals for the 2022 budget are pretty strong. The budget benchmark of about $57 per barrel is decent, considering the current, the prevailing oil price. The projections for GDP growth is pretty decent also. I think we have concerns about other aspects of the budget, especially the revenue projections, the expenditures, and how certain things are allocated. But I guess we'll get into those ones further downstream.
Yes, revenue is one key issue everyone's talked about, whether we need it to service our debt or to provide for infrastructure, pay salaries, reduce our borrowing. You folks believe that the figure for next year was unrealistic, 10.13 trillion. Why is this figure concerning to you folks at BudgIT?
So there are several reasons why this is a big concern for us at BudgIT. First and foremost, it's one of the highest projections that this government has had so far. It's one of the highest. If you look at its actual earnings over the last 6 years from 2015, the government has never earned anything up to 6 trillion. I think the highest it has done so far was about 4.12 trillion. So if you come out with a revenue projection of about 10.1 trillion, that's more than twice the highest you have ever earned. So I think that's a bit of a concern, especially if you consider that the government is not doing anything differently right now than it has done in the last maybe 2-3 years when it comes to revenue generation. There are still leakages in the revenue collection process. Just this year, we had the Fiscal Responsibility Commission come out to say that there were 33 MDAs who were not remitting or who did not remit up to 1.2 trillion naira. So once you have leakages as large as that, it's very doubtful that you'll be able to hit your 10.1 trillion. And this is important because once you make bogus revenue projections and revenue projections that are difficult to meet, what you have is a scenario where public or government agencies enter into contracts with contractors, and ultimately once you're unable to meet up with contractual obligations, largely because you didn't earn enough revenue, you end up borrowing borrowing more than you have projected, or the alternative to borrowing more than you have projected is to leave some of these contracts abandoned. And this is part of the reason why we have had more than 11,800 abandoned projects at the federal, at the state government levels over the last 30 to 40 years. That's because a lot of the revenue projections are false. The government gets into contractual obligations it's unable to meet, and at the end of the day, many of these contracts end up being abandoned. So I think that's a big concern for us.
Abel, the job of the National Assembly to see through these landmines, let me put it that way, or potholes, as it were, in the fiscal appropriations year after year. But we haven't heard a word from them, and sometimes the budgets get passed, and some of these things are... Do you think we have a very messy budgeting process in Nigeria, really?
So I wouldn't classify it as messy at the moment. I would say it's not the best we can have.
You talk about 300 MDAs not reporting.
So I mean,
with a whole lot of projects being... that's messy, if you're looking from a corporate point of view.
So, Bosin, I think I will agree with you on that point. It's quite messy.
No, you've got to agree. If you have 300 MDAs, we're talking about 300 out of about 700 we have. That's nearly half of them not providing details of what goes into the budget and expenditure and everything. And we keep pouring this money, hundreds of billions. So that's the reason why you folks at BudgIT raised this alarm, as it were, at this point when the proposal is still before the National Assembly for them to look into it. Look at the NDDC. Talk to me about it.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about the NDDC. It's one of the most disturbing aspects for us.
One of the mess.
Yeah, I agree. What we can say is that we've looked through the budget and we found out that what you have as an allocation for NDDC's capital project, you just basically see zero there, which is really not possible. If you look at NDDC's earnings over the last 3-4 years, the average of its earnings only from the 3% NDDC levy, which it gets from 3% of oil companies' operations budget, has amounted to about 198 billion if you take the average between 2017 and 2019. That amount of money is not reflected anywhere in the budget. So once you have a budget where 198 billion naira, it's not being put out in the public domain for scrutiny, it gives cause for concern, especially if you consider the reality with the volume of corruption that has happened in the NDDC over time. And it's not just with this administration. Over the years, since the inception of that agency, it has been fraught with various forms of corruption.
Those allegations that they haven't been proved. No one has been taken to a court of law, by the way. So those are remain allegations.
So I mean, we can call them allegations, but some of them have been reported by the Auditor General. And once the Auditor General of the Federation, who has responsibility to find out where these loopholes are and to identify these issues of corruption, once the Auditor General has identified these issues, they are beyond the realm of allegations. Now it's time for the government to take action. And I think this is one of also the weak points of this administration. We have statements and allegations that have been confirmed by the Auditor General's office since 2016. And he has published them in his 2016 audit report, 2017, 2018. And annually, these things are published, but no action is taken in terms of holding people accountable. If you even think about the forensic audit report that was done with the NDDC, that was announced over 2 years ago. Now it's been completed. The report is still not in the public domain. No realistic action has been taken about...
Abel, just respectfully, let me cut in due to time constraints. Give me your final point. What needs to change in Nigeria's annual budgeting process in order to deliver socio-economic value and development to the people of Nigeria?
So I would say what needs to change immediately is that there needs to be a holistic budgeting system, but beyond being holistic, it needs to also have a system for reducing inflated projects. If I cite a key example here to illustrate this point, the State House Medical Center is constructing the presidential wing of that medical center, and it's taking, it has a budget of 21.9 billion just for the presidential wing of the State House Medical Center. That's a huge amount of money to go into that project, especially if you consider that what was allocated for this same project in 2019 was just 395 million naira. So how do you go from 395 million for a project to 21.9 billion just for the presidential wing of the State House Medical Center?
Well, maybe if we spend so much money at the presidential wing of the medical center, the next president will not have to travel out of the country on medical tourism. And the vice president, by the way, maybe everybody in Aso Rock. Maybe that's the reason.
Well, I mean, you can achieve what you want to achieve for less. You can do that. You can get a presidential with a decent one for about 2 to 3 billion naira. You do not need to spend 21 billion on construction, and that's not allocation for equipment. That's just construction. That's a lot of money for that specific project, especially as this is the third year that project will be ongoing. So are we saying that in a country like Nigeria, we cannot complete the presidential wing of our president in less than 2 years or in less than a year? So those are some of the concerns we have as it concerns the costs of some of the projects in the budget.
And there's a whole lot. Let's wait a little bit for the National Assembly to dig into the budget. We're going to have this conversation again, a different point of it, when we hear from the legislators. They have the draft, they have the proposal presented by Mr. President and the executive branch. So let's wait to hear from the National Assembly. But we've heard from you at BudgIT. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you to both.